I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities of Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss a cornucopia of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly new music wrap-ups. On this podcast, it's time Tom and I discuss the month of March.
The month of March.
And the music that it produced. Before we get started, you can help support Velocities of Music. Subscribe to Velocities of Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episodes sent to your device each week. Also, Velocities of Music does not want your money. We also don't want to introduce ads to this podcast yet. Right now, all we want is for you to share Velocities of Music with family or friends whom you think would benefit in joining in on the music discussion that Tom and I attempt to create every week. Tom Hummer.
Yes.
Good evening.
Hello.
It's a Tuesday night.
Yeah.
We're recording March. And actually, because music comes out on Friday, new releases come out on Friday, just the way that the month worked, March was kind to us and allowed us a couple days in March to actually record the podcast.
Yeah, that's true.
That's an affordance we don't normally get.
We're not late to the game since
by like a week.
Yeah, since the first day of April is on a Friday.
This should come out like right at the beginning of April instead of a week into.
Yeah.
So we're ahead of the game.
Yeah.
We're ahead of the game.
I like when the calendar works for us and not against us.
I gotta say, a lot of music came out this month.
It did. I also think in general we're starting to see 2016 really kick into gear. I felt like there were a lot of high quality releases this month that we just didn't really see in January and February.
There wasn't a lot of albums that I hated, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I said I wasn't going to say this on the podcast, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. I didn't notice a lot of metal albums.
Yeah, what the hell?
I know. I'm kind of pissed about that.
Come on, guys, get rocking.
It's been a long day. I'd like to listen to some metal music. Yeah. What more can a guy ask for?
Right. Yeah.
I'm sure there were some quality releases that we didn't get to, metal releases that we didn't get to, because, let's face it, there's a lot of music that comes out every month, and even with the format that Tom and I take on preparing for this podcast, where we listen to an album once or twice, whatever comes out each week, there's no way we can have absolute coverage over all the music that comes out every week. I mean, it's just not possible. It's not feasible for Tom and I to listen to that much music and then for us to regurgitate that for you guys in a podcast. So, we admit we miss some, but we do the best we can. At the end of the year, what we'll do, we'll ask you guys, what albums did we miss? And we'll go through some of those albums.
Definitely.
But for March, a lot of new music. I think we have 34 albums we got to get through today.
Holy crap.
I'm excited about
it,
Tom. You ready to kick this off?
I'm ready.
All right. Here comes March 2016 new album wrap-ups.
We are kicking off March with a surprise release from none other than Kendrick Lamar, one of our favorite artists right now.
Definitely
released easily one of the best albums of 2015.
Maybe of the 2010s.
Right, it maybe of all time.
Right,
I don't know.
Right.
Who knows?
Hey, we're gonna wait and see.
We will wait and see. But in March 2016. He released Untitled, Unmastered.
Didn't Spotify accidentally drop this thing
they
a
did,
day or two
a little bit early, and then I never know when shit like that happens if it's deliberate or not.
I think it's deliberate. It's propaganda,
cheeky, right?
BS. They totally
get stuff stirred up
because everyone because of all the news coverage, it probably got way more hits than it would have otherwise.
Right. You put the album out, then you remove it, then you release it again. Now, if you're Kanye, you iterate that 8 times.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the life of Pablo.
You just keep reiterating the life of Pablo over and over again.
Right, exactly. So I'm glad Kendrick didn't do that. There was just a little slip up. But what were we left with? We're left with really extremely minimalist hip hop with a lot of jazz and soul influence. It reminds me of some of the more recent stuff the Roots have done, but also, of course, combined with what has become Kendrick Lamar's kind of signature style. It's a little more laid back. It's not as aggressive, but it's chock full of ideas. On a short album that really just feels more like sketches, it's amazing that he can still put out something that still feels impactful, even though it's not the gaudy extravaganza of To Pimp a Butterfly, and I say that as a compliment. But he goes completely to the opposite direction. Now, I was wondering after To Pimp a Butterfly came out, what the hell is Kendrick gonna do next? Where does he go from there? And this feels like a logical next step. Scale everything back, strip it down to its emotional core, and really just make it more about the ideas rather than the real crystal clear definitions on the music.
If you ever wonder whether or not an acclaimed artist is worth their salt, just listen to their B-sides. That's essentially what Untitled, Unmastered is, at least to me. B-sides to the To Pimp a Butterfly sessions. It's Kendrick Lamar's Amnesiac, and personally I think this is a brilliant record. The songs that Kendrick throws away are still the best in the game, and I can understand why these tracks weren't included on To Pimp a Butterfly. They're way more low-key, as you said, Tom. Traditional, they're traditional hip-hop tracks, with real instrumentation, some string production, collaborative, jazzy choruses, none of the sharpened edge of To Pimp a Butterfly. Even in its unpolished state, these songs are great to listen to, and Kendrick's rapping is as good as ever. That being said, these are clearly demos and unfinished songs, so naturally there is a disparity in the quality of the tracks throughout the album listen, and this plays more like an EP than anything else, and probably should be considered as such.
Hit the bank and withdraw, hit the bank and withdraw, hit the bank and withdraw. Put myself in the rocket ship and I shot for the stars. Look at what you accomplishing, what he said to the bar. I'ma make you some promises that you just can't ignore. Your profession anonymous as an artist. If I don't target your market, if you ain't signing your...
Following Kendrick Lamar, we have Robert Pollard's latest release, Of Course You Are. Robert Pollard, of course, is the former frontman of the indie rock band from the 90s, Guided by Voices.
Of course he is.
Of course he is. Oh, God, I see what you did that. I see what you did. It totally got me. All right. I'm not digging this album very much. It's not for lack of ideas. Pollard is jumping all over the place here. Some of the tracks are punk-infused attacks, some of them are string and piano ballads, and others are more typical alternative rock. His vocals are not the strongest from a melody or performance perspective, and nothing about the instrumentation is overly engaging or unique. That said, these songs are well-written and somewhat catchy. I get the sense that this album could have been a lot better with more convincing performances across the board.
I could always let you slide to a boiling pot, to an oven door. That's what friends are for. I could never let you score.
Next up, we've got a new album from artist Ray. Now, I'm going to approach this one of three ways. LaMontagne, LaMontagne, or LaMontagne.
I go LaMontagne. LaMontagne. That's how I do it.
I actually think it's Ray LaMontagne. I don't know if that's right or not.
It sounds classier than what I said.
Right, we'll go with it. This guy is a bluesy singer-songwriter. He's been historically a little bit more on kind of the folksy side of things. Very nice kind of raw, raspy, real voice, but he's making it a little bit sweeter on his newest album, which is titled Ouroboros. God damn it.
Ouroboros.
He's getting me again.
Ouroboros.
The one word I can pronounce here is Ray. I know how to pronounce that.
Let's stick to the small words.
So what Ray is doing on this album is it's got a little more edge and intrigue than some of his past work. It really steps above that kind of typical folksy singer-songwriter format and uses an approach that's very progressive in nature, a way you don't really see people in this style expanding into. It feels more Pink Floyd-ish at times, and even his voice reminds me a bit of David Gilmour. This is definitely one that I believe really deserves multiple listens, especially with the albumization that he's infusing into the structure here.
Yeah, I've given this one a couple of listens. It drew me back in, and I would agree with your assessment around the similarities between the Pink Floyd sound. Also, I'd throw a little bit of Beck in there. The part one tracks, this album's divided into two parts, which just general disclaimer, I love it when artists do this. So the first half has part one tracks, and they're generally more upbeat and rocking, while the part two tracks on the back half of the album are generally more mellow and brooding. Throughout the album, you hear lush instrumentation, acoustic and electric guitars, keys, vocal choruses, piano. The vocals are dreamy, they add a lot of melody, but never completely dominate the sound. They add just enough melody to participate in the arrangement. What really gives the sound depth is the production, which is spot on, particularly in regards to mixing all of the instrumentation together perfectly. This is really a solid record. Following Ray LaMontagne, we have Esperanza Spalding's Emily's D+Evolution. I believe this is her fifth record. She won a Grammy for Best New Artist a few years ago.
Yep.
Wow, this album I was impressed by. This is certainly a sound that you don't hear every day. Definitely can be characterized as jazz fusion, but this adds different flavors in addition to that foundation. There are is a driving prog element throughout this record. Electric guitar is added to the mix over the expansive bass parts and Spalding's beautiful sprawling vocal parts. This is a concept record which adds to the complexity to the overall sound. The song structuring follows no predictable patterns, I love that, instead of focusing on singular and sometimes multiple sonic ideas and allowing those ideas to build and grow, then flowing to the next idea. This record is one that takes time to fully grasp, but each listen is more rewarding than the last.
Dancing and singing, scripted delight. Every act ends and break up. That same old boring story I played too many nights. The curtain and I fall.
Next up, we have Lapsley, Long Way Home. This is a vocal-based female pop artist with electronic beats driving the music. I would say kind of in a similar vein to artists like Broods, Banks, Jessie Ware, maybe mix it with a little bit of the mood of like the XX. I found that Lapsley really has a unique and endearing voice. It's got this kind of soulful blues element to it that I feel like you don't get a lot in today's kind of female pop genre, especially when it's based around those kind of sparse electronic beats. That is the thing for me that really set it apart. Even so, I don't feel like the songwriting or the style is overly original. It's really just her vocal performance that made it memorable for me. So I found this album to be really pretty good, but not overly impressive.
This isn't a backbench post. These are the times to suffer the most. Now it stretches to beyond the darkness. It wraps around me and I wake up heartless. Scanning the space for a punk heart like whoa.
Next up, we have the 8th studio record from one of my favorite artists of all time, M. Ward. M. Ward is a Portland-based singer-songwriter, Americana, indie artist, indie folk artist. I mean, he fits kind of all those labels. Mm-hmm. And I love that he titled this album More Rain, because that's completely wrong. He should have titled it More Crap. Have you ever seen The Princess Bride? Remember the machine, Tom, that Humperdinck sentences Wesley to, that it's called The Machine, and it tortures him and sucks years of his life away?
Yeah.
That's More Rain.
That's this album?
That's this album. I really wasn't a fan of A Wasteland Companion a few years ago, and this album, to me, is a little bit brighter than a Wasteland Companion, just in its like general optimism. But you have all the gimmicks that M. Ward has slowly been using more and more of, especially since he started working with Zoe. He's slowly been doing this more and more, where his songs just keep getting simpler and simpler, and focusing on using these simple melodies, simple cliches. His lyrics aren't nearly as good, and his vocal parts aren't nearly as good. He doesn't use a lot of the dynamicism in his vocal melodies to add a lot of contrast or the gruffness of his voice. He just makes pretty little, indie folk ditties.
I wasn't huge on this album. I don't think I disliked it quite as much as you did.
Total bias here, because I love his earlier albums so much, so hipster of me, but like albums like 1 through 4 are so fantastic.
I actually think I liked this considerably more than A Wasteland Companion, but it came off to me as very uninspired. His early work, I feel like he really had something to say and something to accomplish, and now, like you said, it just feels like he's kind of redoing the same old ditties in the same old style, but I don't really feel like he's bringing the heart to it anymore that he used to.
It's alright if you don't mind. It's alright if you do. You're still coming through on a pirate dive. On a pirate dive.
Next up, we've got the new album from The Coral, Distance Inbetween. This is rock, kind of fuzzy, slightly psychedelic alt-rock. Reminds me a little bit of Doves and some of their later career albums. I think the sound is kind of neat, but honestly, I found the performance and the writing to actually be a bit boring. Really, actually, that's an understatement. I found it to be extremely boring, if I'm being brutally honest here.
These guys sounded to me like an opening band. They have some interesting gimmicks in their sound and a polished presentation, but they lack the good songwriting and originality to really convince anyone that they are worth their salt. I think the most underwhelming aspect of the sound is the vocals, which offer little to help the presentation overall. The vocalists voice simply isn't that strong, and it doesn't convey much emotion, nor does it provide well-written melodies. This makes the experience lack warmth, which actually takes away from some of the nicer, though safe things that they are doing in the songwriting. The production doesn't help the sound either. Everything is mixed very mid-rangey, and the vocals are very loud in the mix, adding to the issues. Following the choral, we have Miike Snow's third album, entitled 3. Clever album title.
Aptly named.
Aptly named. These guys are... how would you describe this? I've always called this electro pop. They have a lot of... They have a lot of like almost indie. It's indie music, Tom. It's rock music, but it's so drowned in electronic beats and synths and melodies that it's like electronic pop music that's very aesthetic and fun and upbeat. I really liked their album from a few years ago.
Happy to You.
Happy to You.
Yeah, we liked that a lot more than a lot of critics did, actually.
Yeah, it had a number of songs that I still come back to this day, years later. And so I was kind of excited for 3 to come out. These guys just know how to write insanely catchy vocal hooks, but they can also write darn good electronic melodies. On 3, it's like they were burnt out and not feeling the spark anymore. It's like the same Miike Snow from previous records, but the glass of water that's been left out for a couple days, this tastes a little stale.
Please don't knock over my heart, 'cause my heart is full of you. Yeah, my heart is full of you. And don't worry about tomorrow.
Next up, we have classic country artist Loretta Lynn with her new album, Full Circle. Now, Jake, you might be surprised to hear this because Loretta Lynn is not an artist we've talked about much. I am actually a big Loretta Lynn fan.
I'm not surprised.
Really?
Old ladies.
God damn.
You got a thing for them.
What? This is a terrible rumor to have started right now. But I guess I really, I set myself up for that in all reality.
Did, buddy.
But I do have a couple Loretta Lynn records of her old stuff, especially her work with Conway Twitty. I just love some of those tracks, those duets. This is the kind of country that I am into. It never gets old to me. And Loretta Lynn at 83 years old, she still sounds pretty damn good. I'll always favor that older work of hers, but I do love to hear that she's still kicking it. But at the same time, on Full Circle, I don't think there's anything particularly noteworthy. If you like Loretta Lynn, you'll probably enjoy this album. But if you're like me, you'll probably prefer that nostalgic old-time production sound, especially with the fact that on Full Circle, she's reworking some of her classic songs. One that stuck out to me was the track Fist City on here, which has always been a favorite of mine. It's such a fun track. And here, I almost think that it takes away from the track when you produce it so cleanly. I love the old-timey sound of her older work, but still, a lot of respect for Loretta Lynn.
Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. Lord, I want to go to heaven, but I don't want to die. Go along for the day when I'll have a new birth. Still, I love living here on earth.
All right, next up we have the 9th studio album from punk rock band Violent Femmes, entitled We Can Do Anything. This is actually the first Violent Femmes record in 16 years.
Jeez.
These guys came back, they're excited, they released a new album, and it's okay.
Yeah.
These guys, the sound reminds me a lot of They Might Be Giants, just more based in acoustic rock. The composition relies on the lyrics to convey the primary ideas of each of the tracks, and the quirkiness of the lyrics matches the quirky vocal presentation. I like this in general. In general, the instrumentation is fairly basic. You have acoustic guitars and acoustic drums. The songwriting isn't anything to get excited about. Everything here has been done before, oftentimes by Violent Femmes himself. There are some solid tunes, but naturally there is some disparity between the quality of tracks that makes this hit or miss to me. This is a short album by design, but it still gets stale by the end, which is indicative of bigger issues.
Do not tell me about your issues. Oh God, you're gonna talk about them more and more. I'll get some tissues.
soon you'll be crying on my kitchen floor. I don't need to talk about it. I don't.
Next, we have Polica with their new album, United Crushers. Jake, we reviewed their album Shulamith a few years ago and liked it all right.
Yeah, it's all right.
I don't think I liked it as much as their debut, and I wouldn't say I liked United Crushers as much as I liked their debut either, but it's still a pretty good album, and actually I would say I probably like it a little bit more than Shulamith. It's a little bit more consistent, but I feel like it didn't quite have the standouts. Now, I think that this group, being that it's very vocal focused with the female vocalist who has a very sugary sweet voice, also packs a lot of emotion into it, some intriguing electronic beats and melodies driving things, a lot of processing going on. I like the overall sound. I think that she makes it very fresh, but in general I feel like United Crushers just brought the atmospheric components of their sound down a notch. I liked that about especially their debut. This is a little bit harder hitting at times, but still I think what they're doing pretty well.
Next up, we have the 7th studio album entitled Forever Sounds from Cincinnati, Ohio-based indie rock band Wussy. I never listened to these guys before.
Me neither.
Tom. And I gotta say, reminds me a lot of Wyoke. You got, noise. It's noisy rock with male and female vocals. A lot of shoegaze edge to it.
Yes.
Maybe even a little bit of Typhoon at times too. Artists that it reminds me of. If you haven't checked out Typhoon, shame on you. This clearly succeeds due to strong songwriting. Wussy seemed to know exactly what it takes for their particular style and strengths to be morphed into really endearing, listenable tunes. I find myself really enjoying this album, and the sonic textures and overall production add a mysterious aesthetic to the sound that I just really dig. This is totally my cup of tea, and I'll be coming back.
Yeah, the presentation here is really kind of dirty, but despite that, they still really establish an emotional connection with the listener, rather than just going for any kind of pure rock attitude. The performances aren't perfect, but I like actually that kind of endearing, flawed quality of the vocals. It ends up sounding really well executed. I think this is one of the best releases this month. Next up, we have Hair in Oblivion with their self-titled album, Hair in Oblivion. This is kind of noisy folk rock with also some southern rock influence. I would say even a bit of Celtic influence, particularly in the vocals. This is produced to sound very ethereal and hazy, which it achieves. However, it's at the expense of a lot of the instrumentation. This lead guitar performance is quite good. It's soloing throughout the album. There's a lot of movement, but the rest of the instrumentation and the vocals, to some extent, kind of lack creativity in the melody and the songwriting. They'll take one melody and kind of just hammer it over and over again. So I see a lot of potential here, but I just think that there's going to have to be some kind of key changes. They're going to have to kind of excite the sound a little bit more, do a little bit more with it before I really become overly intrigued. But this was a pretty decent release.
All right, next up we have a debut album from a Norway-based singer-songwriter. I would really call her an electronic artist, electronic pop artist.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a singer-songwriter element to just the way that she crafts her songs. Her name is Aurora, and the album is called All My Demons, Greeting Me as a Friend.
And it's not metal.
It's not metal. That's
Totally
a total
metal album title.
It's just a metal tease.
This is as
in the
far
month of
away
no
from metal as it gets.
Yeah. I get a lot of Imogen Heap influence on this record, especially in Aurora's vocals. While this isn't the most brilliant thing I've heard in the electronic pop genre, there are some tracks I enjoyed, particularly on the back half of this album, Home and Under the Water, to to point out too that I really liked. I agree she could emote more in her vocals with you, Tom. I'm reading your notes ahead. But unfortunately, it seems like this vocal style she is going for is in that Nora pop style that's made famous by Lana Del Rey, and it's really in vogue now. And that's more about creating mystique than emotion.
Yeah, that's the thing that bothered me the most, is she seems to have absolutely no idea how to emote in her singing, and it makes the connection she's trying to achieve completely worthless. I mean, she might as well be reading the nutritional facts on her bag of organic pita chips. I don't know. I just picture her snacking on some pita chips, singing
Organic,
the label.
of course.
They've got to be, right? that just it fits my vision, man. This is my opinion.
That's
and
spot on.
You don't get to tell me that it's wrong. It bothered me for that reason. I think that there's some talent here, but that warrant wasn't there for me, so I didn't dig it much.
There's blood on your lies, the sky's up and wide. There is nowhere for you to hide. The heart, this moon is shining. I'm running with the wolves tonight. I'm running with the wolves. I'm running with the
Next up, we have the debut LP from Flatbush Zombies. It's called 3001, A Laced Odyssey. I can barely even say that with a straight face.
I'm out.
This is a hip-hop trio from New York, and this is the kind of modern hip-hop that just bothers the shit out of me. I mean, it not quite as badly as some artists coming out, like, we had a release from Future recently. I felt like there was not really any redeeming qualities there. There are some here. It's a small step forward from that. There's actually some, like, atmosphere in the beats. Some of the song structures are actually kind of interesting, but the vocal delivery is just consistently obnoxious. It's not smooth, and the lyrics have absolutely nothing to say. No quality conversation here. I mean, just listening through this, the rapping, once they start rapping, it all just goes to hell. Anything good to say about the rest of the sound is just completely squashed by how awful the delivery and the lyrics are. I have nothing good to say about the quality of the rapping on this album. I could not stand it.
Got an ounce to burn, got a trip to make. Bring my niggas low, made it right today. Got an ounce to burn, got a trip to make. Not a thug, but niggas know how I keep mine. Cola up, or quick to throw up the peace sign. Throw that pussy, let me hit.
Next up, we have the third album, entitled Standards, from an artist called Into It, Over It, which is the stage name or indie rock solo project name for this guy, Evan Thomas Weiss, who is, this album is kind of labeled emo.
Yeah.
And his sound is kind of labeled emo. And interestingly enough, Tom,
Yeah.
you'll appreciate this. This guy's a huge Sunny Day Real Estate fan.
Well, he'd better be.
He better be, because Sunny Day Real Estate's awesome.
Well, he has ears, doesn't he?
Yeah. Of course he does. So that means he obviously has seen the light. I gotta say,
Right.
I've never been exposed to Evan's music before. Into It, Over It. I really enjoyed this record. This is a strong album. The vocalist sounds a lot like Ben Gibbard back in the day when he actually had some conviction in his vocals. I'm loving the acoustic sound, and the more pop punk moments on this record add an energy to the listen. I think that the main thing that makes this such a great album is the strong and authentic songwriting. This has tremendous comeback quality.
Yeah, I love the nostalgic throwback emo sound. He does it really well, incorporates a lot of dynamics. If you're a fan of bands like American Baseball, No Knife, or Jimmy Eat World, definitely check this out. Next, we have probably the biggest disagreement between Jake and I this month.
Dun dun dun.
It's daunting. Here we go. I'm going to have to try to defend myself because it's a constant battle against this guy. So, nothing to say to that. You're just going to leave me on my own here. Okay. So this album is Emmy the Great's Second Love. This I would describe as kind of artsy pop. It's artsy enough that it probably would never get mainstream radio play, but it's poppy enough that there's really no other genre to place it in. It kind of reminds me of a combination of modern synth pop along the lines of like Chairlift, but mixed with some of the poppier, more rock sounds of like St. Vincent's last album. I really like the production and the diverse instrumentation. There was some intrigue there, but I just didn't find the songs interesting or really exciting in the least.
So I disagree, but not hugely, but
Okay.
a significant disagreement nonetheless, Tom.
Yeah.
I like the overall sound and aesthetic of Second Love, but in general, I would agree with your description. I really like the track Algorithm. That was a standout for me, while the intensity level of this whole album hovers at about like a 2.5 out of 10.
Yeah.
You do experience a lot of creative, polished songwriting. The production is very pristine. To really appreciate this record, I think that you have to get an emotional appeal from the vocals and the lyrics. This enhances the underlying mood of the record. But even then, I still don't love this. I like it, and I would recommend it to anyone who is looking for more original sounding indie pop music.
Gotta find a place for the love I have within. Pumping through my heart like an algorithm. Showing me
Speaking of pop,
Yeah.
we got the latest album from Iggy Pop
Iggy Pop.
called Post-Pop Depression.
Nice.
And really, calling this an Iggy Pop record, which, by the way, if we are going to do that, which we are, it's his 17th solo. I'm saying solo with
solo,
air quotes
heavy
to
quotes.
Tom here.
You can't
Josh
see him.
Homme.
Yeah.
Josh Homme. He was, you said, pure collaborator. Collaborated on every track.
Yep. They also had Dean Fertitti and I forget the gentleman's name, but the drummer from the Arctic Monkeys playing on this. So
This is a super
It
group.
is a super.
This is
they
an
should have
Iggy
just
Pop.
they should have just given it a new band name. Kind of reminds me of, remember when we had them Crooked Vultures
Yeah.
years back
Yeah.
with John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin,
Right.
Dave Grohl, and Josh Homme, of course, again,
Right.
because the guy is everywhere.
Right.
Like they gave that project its own name. I think that this almost deserves its own name because it has a very unique sound. I don't think it sounds like a lot of Iggy Pop's previous work.
Definitely true. That's a really great point. The music on Post-Pop Depression is pretty interesting. Lots of clangy, often distorted guitars with lots of interesting percussion and auxiliary percussion. Overall, I like the sound, the songwriting, and the mood that they're going for. I think that the main thing that's holding this record back is the vocals, and they're just not that inspired, both from a vocal melody and a vocal performance perspective. And I think it leaves a lot of good energy yet to be capitalized on.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I want to emphasize that I really like the instrumentals on this album.
Absolutely, I
though.
did too.
It grooves really hard. It has this kind of exotic foreign feel to it. And despite the supergroup kind of setup, it never feels like anyone's showboating. The collaboration is solid, but overall, I felt like I dug the style more than I dug the songs.
Gardenia, where are you?
Next, we have the new album from Glenn Jones titled Fleeting. This is very complex, kind of bare acoustic guitar. This guy is clearly a virtuoso. Also incorporates some other stringed instruments. I recall hearing some banjo in there, I believe. The performances are extremely impressive, and the writing here is really pretty good. It hits a very specific mood because of how straightforward and stripped down the actual instrumental palette and concept is. It's naturally limited in scope, but what it accomplishes, it accomplishes exactly what it sets out to do, and I actually ended up really enjoying it.
Next up, we have the latest release from British electronica group Underworld called Barbara, We Face a Shining Future. Also, not a metal album.
No.
Unfortunately. But overall, this, not unfortunately. I take that back.
Yeah.
This is pretty good. This is pretty darn good. Underworld have been around since the early 80s, so it's no surprise that their particular flavor of electronic music is more progressive and sprawling than anything else that has come out this month. First thing I noticed, longer track lengths. These guys take their time letting their songs unfold and flow into new movements. They combine a lot of heavier beats with more moving electronica melodies. This reminds me a bit like The Knife at times, only with loads more atmosphere. There's even a Spanish guitar instrumental track in the heart of the album. I like this mainly because these guys know the best parts of electronica and how to use it to make great electronica songs.
Don't lift you to keep away from the dark side.
Next, we have a new album from Damien. Is it Jurado?
How'd we say it when we
I don't
did
know. When we reviewed
Brothers
that
and
album,
Sisters of the Internal Sun?
I don't know.
Which was his last album. I
Right.
think it came out in like 2013.
Yeah, a few years back.
We really liked it.
Yeah, and this guy has a great sound. It's very atmospheric, very kind of...
It's folk based.
Right, it is folk based. I was going to say lo-fi, but that's not really right because the actual production standards here are really high. There's a lot going on in the mix. There are a lot of layers that are produced really sharply. It's more that it's just performed in a very low-key manner. This is actually, I would describe this music as kind of sleepy. And now with Visions of Us on the Land coming as the last album in this trilogy that Damien has created, starting with Maricopa into Brothers and Sisters of the Eternal Sun, now Visions of Us on the Land. It's a much more sprawling album, and Damien is an extremely talented artist. However, I do feel like it's a little difficult to remain engaged through this 17-track, 52-minute album when the sound is naturally kind of sleepy and distant. There's a lot of fog here, and it's a little bit exacerbated by the lack of variety in track lengths. A lot of these are between like 3 to 3.5 minutes. It's a little bit too uniform for me. I like having albums that have kind of centerpieces or highlights with the rest of the tracks kind of gluing them together and serving as a function. So it was a little bit too much of a plateau for me, but I still want to come back to this because there's just so many intriguing things in the sound.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Andrew Bird and Fleet Foxes, which are two of my favorite artists. Mm-hmm. His sound seems definitely cemented to the indie folk genre, as I said before, and he pulls it off pretty well. Many of these songs are fairly lush compositions consisting of big instrumental swells, adding a ton of dynamics to the moody atmosphere he creates. Jurado's voice is almost too pretty on Visions of Us on the Land. His vocals are so beautifully sung, but done so without the proper intensity to match what is going on in the instrumentation at times. I still think that it's a very solid record and performed well on all aspects. It's just not a masterpiece.
Nothing is sure but the time we got. There's your blood run cold. Oh, your eyes go wild.
Next up, we have the latest album from Primal Scream, entitled Chaosmosis. What a corny album title. These guys are clearly dads. Big beats, lots of synths, highly overproduced guitars, reverbed everything. I'm really not digging the production on this record. I get that they are trying to sound futuristic, indie pop, indie rock, whatever you want to call it, but it just doesn't help the sound they are going for, and it covers up some of the better parts of their songwriting. Speaking of the songwriting, it's not great. It's completely centered around the generic pop structure, and a few tracks I find particularly very predictable and very boring. This one just really isn't worth your time.
Next, we have the new album from Lucy Dacus entitled No Burden. This is alt rock with kind of a country twinge, female singer-songwriter. Reminds me kind of a mix of Laura Marling and Courtney Barnett. More rocking than Laura Marling, but more country than Courtney Barnett. I really enjoyed this album. The songwriting has a lot of variety within it, but it still feels consistent in presentation. I think that's a difficult balance to achieve, and Lucy really nails that here. The performances are tactful, not boring, but not over the top. And Lucy seems to know just exactly what her strengths are and plays off of them. I was just really impressed.
You know, one thing I just thought of, this actually sounds a lot like the Wussy album that also came out this month. And I also like that record.
Yeah.
Damn, do I like the guitar sound on No Burden. Great artist comparison, Tom. I would add Y Oak to the artist you named, mainly for the oakiness, obviously. This album
Yes, very
simply, this album to me is simply impressive. The whole sound is built around that furiously strummed, clean electric guitar that Lucy's wonderfully in her wonderfully folksy voice. This is all about the songwriting. It's fresh, it's dynamic, it's original. I like everything about it.
I get tongue-tied every time I try to tell you what I think is right, 'cause I think it's wrong when you sit around looking like a tar.
Next up, we have the third album from electronic artist and DJ called The Range, who, it's just a stage name for a guy named James Hinton. This record, called Potential, is an interesting concept record because what The Range, or James, is doing is he's taking samples from YouTube and using those as his vocals.
Yeah, interesting concept.
It is an interesting concept, and it's worth checking out just for that. The concept doesn't necessarily translate into a great album listening experience for a couple of reasons, in my opinion. First, the sampled vocals prevent there from being a signature grounding voice that unites the album and makes it feel more cohesive. Thankfully, The Range chooses an electronic aesthetic that stays pretty consistent throughout the album. The other thing that brings us down a bit for me is that the music on each track tends to be a single idea in a repeated loop. The idea itself is well composed, but it has a tendency to make the songs feel longer than they really need to be. I enjoyed this overall, but I'm not thinking it's revolutionary or a masterpiece.
Next, we have an album from Anna Meredith. The album's titled Varmints. This is extremely experimental, artistic electronic pop. This is one of the most unique albums I've probably heard all year.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, though, it's not really in a way that excited me. I definitely want to listen to this again, but I think that the first time around, I just didn't really know even what to think of it. The vocals are kind of sparse. There's some tracks that have some vocals, but a lot of times it just feels like these experimental sketches with just this very hard-hitting electronic sound.
Yeah, this is definitely a way to make electronic music original. And I gotta say, I appreciate that. For one thing, Tom, as you and I have discussed on previous podcasts, originality is really what I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
Like if a sound in an album are original, it generally resonates pretty well with me. And so this kind of caught my attention from the first track, and on that first track you hear horns, grating, aggressive horns, and they're definitely electronic and MIDI sounding, but then this industrial beat comes in, and then it's just absolute sonic chaos. Varmints is essentially anarchist music. They don't care about the rules. They are there and here to break them. One thing I noticed is that most of the songs start with this fast-paced electronic melody that's looped like every measure, then slower, more melodic aspects of the track build in, and the combination of melody and originality just really impressed me. Next up, we have the latest album from Thug and Trancer called Arcology, which, Tom, did you know Arcologies were from SimCity 2? And I don't know if this is what this is referring to. It absolutely probably isn't. But like the first thing that comes to mind, I used to play SimCity 2000 when I was a little kid, like 8, 9 years old.
Okay.
And the whole goal was to get your city big enough that you unlocked the Arcology, which is like these cities that were inside of a building, and they held like over 100,000 people. Was the coolest thing ever.
And this is how they got kids involved with the Illuminati.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm going to move on. This is techno music. It big, fat beats that make you feel like you're in a video game. It's Tron, really. Glitchy, looped synth melodies, lots of electronic sound effects. Definitely takes a lot of influence from Daft Punk. Lots of drum machines. Honestly, there isn't a lot of substance or purpose here. There's nothing inherently bad about this as a listening experience. I'm just left wondering what the point is. Maybe it's functional.
Next up, we have Tao and the Get Down, Stay Down. And the album is called A Man Alive. This is whimsical pop rock. Reminds me in attitude of like Deerhoof, but without that traditional rock setup and more a focus on auxiliary percussion. It actually reminds me a lot of like, if you like artists like Tune Yards, Dirty Projectors, even like Beck's Odelay, with just this kind of like buffet of sounds that are coming in and out of the mix. I absolutely love this album. I was extremely impressed by it, not just because the sound appealed to me in the way that I mentioned, but the vocalist, the female vocalist, she has just a lot of allure in her presentation, a lot of control, a lot of confidence, and the songwriting is just solid throughout. I came away loving this album.
See them on the runway, they bust them in on Sundays. The visitors are meeting to decide if you can come stay. Why deny? Why deny? Why deny? Why deny? I chase a stone cold thief with a
Following Tao, we got RJD2's Dame Fortune. This is really well done electronica music. It doesn't rely too heavily on any cliches or any typical electronica or dance tropes. I like the blend of real instrumentation with synths and other electronic melodies. The styles change between songs, keeps things fresh and moving along at a fluid pace. I'm not blown away by anything I hear on this record. I think the songwriting is still a little too safe to be truly groundbreaking, but overall pretty decent.
Next up, we have a very short album, like under 30 minutes, I believe, from the Thermals called We Disappear. This is, guitar-based rock music. It's got kind of like a lo-fi punk edge to it, but it's still kind of within the indie alternative vein. It's very simplistic, built around a kind of pop structure with repeating guitar melodies over these strummed chords and a lot of very straightforward kind of basic drumming. The vocals are a little nasally. It's kind of part with that style, but overall he provides some decent melody and catchy hooks. A little bit troubled by the production here, which is lo-fi to the point of actually kind of being a distraction at times. There's not really any clarity between the guitars, which just wash out with the constant cymbal crashes. It just doesn't really do a lot for me. It's not really bad though. Like, it's enjoyable enough, but it's also just somewhat forgettable of a rock record.
Next up, we have the solo record, Patch the Sky, from Bob Mould, who is a vocalist and songwriter for bands like Husker Du, Sugar,
yeah.
Which I know you're a big fan of Sugar.
I am,
Tom.
yeah.
Yeah, Tom's been telling me I gotta listen to Sugar, and
Yeah.
I haven't yet. I'm sorry, Tom. But I've listened to a little Husker Du in preparation for our Grunge podcast, which was out last week. If you guys hadn't heard that, definitely go out and check that out. So what did I think of Patch the Sky? This is just the kind of rock that I expect from Bob Mould. This is pretty well written, but fairly one-dimensional. I would have to listen a couple more times to really get the nuances of the songwriting.
Sure.
Definitely reminds me a lot of the Foo Fighters. It's fine, but it doesn't really excite me in any way, nor do I think it accomplishes much more than, being non-offensive rock that pleases fans.
Next, we have a hip-hop release from Open Mike Eagle called Hella Personal Film Festival. I like that album title, and I like this album pretty well also. It's fairly unique hip-hop with a lot of good qualities, but also some downsides. In general, I like the approach to the beats. They provide a lot of atmosphere while also having these subtleties in them rather than just pounding bass and snare, which you get a lot in hip-hop these days. Open Mike's rapping has some really clever lyrics and good flow. He tends to rap on the side of satirical social commentary, so if you're into that, I think you will like a lot of the things that he has to say here. The downside comes in the hooks and choruses, which I feel in general are weakly written and weakly performed. Overall, though, I thought the positives trumped the negatives here, and the originality really had me impressed.
Memory banks, but no credit, let it go, don't edit. I can take it. The only real truth is butt naked, and I know when you're faking. Maybe them others was impatient, but I'm telling you to trust, I can take it. Trust is so sacred. We need a solid.
Next up, we have the latest release from Austin rock band White Denim called Stiff. Calling this rock music doesn't really do White Denim justice because these guys have a very much a throwback sound. I've always considered White Denim classic rock influence, a heavy classic rock influence. I mean, these guys sound straight out of the 70s. They got that whole psychedelic rock, kind of prog rock, almost even a southern vibe at times, and they just fit that style perfectly. A few years ago, we reviewed Corsicana Lemonade and really liked that album, really enjoyed it. Now, since then, White Denim has gone through a bit of a lineup change. And from what I read, they wanted to have Stiff be kind of like a debut album, kind of a reformation of the band. But they didn't want to, have a new name, so they just came out with this as just the next continuation of White Denim. But the idea was that they get back to basics about what makes White Denim great, which I'm just not going to lie, that really excites me. Of course, the guitars are great. Of course, the drumming is impressive. Of course, the overall classic rock throwback aesthetic is fun as hell. These guys just know how to pull off that retro rock sound with so much style and conviction in every facet of their sound. Even the vocalist is spot on, mixing pretty vocals with more gruff, intense yells. Stiff is even more prog and southern rock influenced than Corsicana Lemonade, channeling the Allman Brothers at every turn. I think the only thing that I can really critique these guys on is just the overall originality of their sound and the fact that they're potentially diluting their own sound with each successive release. It doesn't matter as much as they only make really solid records like Stiff.
All right, last album of this podcast for what we are covering in March 2016 is Margo Price, Midwest Farmer's Daughter. Is this album about my wife? Because she is a Midwest farmer's daughter, after all.
It is.
I gotta say.
It is.
Kind of freaking me out. But Margo Price is actually on Jack White's Third Man Records, which I think makes perfect sense. Jack White has been making an effort to really bring back a lot of that authentic blues and country sound, and that's exactly what Margo Price is. This is country as I know country. This is real, good singer-songwriter country with great vocal performance and just a lot of that genuine attitude.
It takes some authentic, well-executed country music for me to like it, and Midwest Farmer's Daughter is just that. Margo Price's vocals are excellent. She has great command over her impressive voice and uses it to provide a ton of intensity through big dynamic contrast. The guitar on this record is really the foundation of the sound. There are a lot of rock and blues influences in the guitar melodies. This sound is definitely edging towards southern rock at times. I think the biggest issue I take with the record is just the simplicity of each track. Not a lot is being done to make this original sounding. It's just a compilation of solid country tunes built around a very talented female vocalist. I can get behind that. This is very enjoyable, and it's just nothing revolutionary.
Better down, I may be wrong, but I got a feeling
Man, that was just a truckload of albums.
Yeah, dude.
Cornucopia, even of
It
albums.
was a cornucopia of albums.
Yeah, so it was a good month for music. You know, a lot of quality releases there, Tom. I felt like we liked a lot more albums than we do on an average month. But the interesting thing is several of our favorite genres didn't have much representation, if any at all. There was no post rock in our list this month, no metal music, but we had a lot of electronic music, which let's just call a spade a spade. A lot of electronic music comes out every month. It's the predominant style of this decade.
Right.
But you also had a lot of folk music, a lot of pop music, and just in general, it was just a bevy of pretty decent quality music.
Sure.
What were some of your favorite artists? Give me three, Tom. What were your three favorite album releases
My favorite
this month?
album this month was definitely Down the Get Down, Stay Down. I loved that album. Also up there, I would say Esperanza Spalding, as well as Into It, Over It. Those were probably my highlights.
So mine had to be Forever Sounds by Wussy, also Lucy Dacus, and then White Denim's latest release, Stiff. Those were my three favorites. So it's interesting because we each took three different favorites, and neither of us chose Kendrick Lamar's album.
That one was still up there, though. That one was great, too.
It was a great record. It just didn't, it wasn't the best thing that came out this month. It just speaks to the high quality of releases this month. Now, Tom, on the spot, did you have any albums that you wouldn't recommend? If you had to pick one or two.
Oh, God, Flatbush Zombies.
Oh, really?
Don't listen to it. Just don't do it, guys.
Yeah, just avoid it at all costs. I have to say, M. Ward's More Rain.
Yeah.
I mean, I was really disappointed. I'm a huge M. Ward fan, and the guy has just been disappointing me at every turn lately. And Andrew Bird has a new album coming out this Friday, April 1st, and
nice.
we'll cover that one next. I'm just dreading it because I know it's probably not going to be very good.
Oh, all right.
But I gotta say this: he had that. I don't know if you saw the video on Facebook, but
the single with Fiona Apple.
Yes,
Yeah.
I listened to it. I was damn impressed.
Yeah.
I was like, this has
gives
some
hope,
edge to
for
it,
sure.
right? Like, there's a lot of like gritty emotion there. Like, I'm pretty excited for Andrew Bird. I thought, I thought his last release, left a little to be desired. So I'm excited for that record to come out.
Same here.
What were your guys' favorite albums that came out in the month of March? What did maybe Tom and I miss that you think we should revisit? Love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys for your continued support and participation with Velocities of Music. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, Facebook messages, and emails. Your participation is what makes Velocities of Music possible. So as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities of Music, moving music discussion forward.